think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Barton. I'm the director of Stanford's Architectural Design Program. Welcome to Stanford's Spring Lecture Series in Architecture, Landscape, and Urban Design. The theme of this year's series is the architecture of joy. In his book, The Architecture of Happiness, Alain de Botton writes, "It is perhaps when our lives are at their most problematic that we are likely to be the most receptive to beautiful things." That point was proven in March of 2020 when many of us began sheltering in place in an attempt to flatten the COVID curve. As we continue to emerge from this pandemic, let's reflect together on the incredible value of architecture in our lives. Our environment brings us joy, inspires us, and reminds us of all of our full potential, both individually and as a community. With that sentiment in mind, we invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy the inspirational work of our talented speaker. Before we begin, I want to thank the rest of our team who helped organize the series. Dave Lennox, the University Architect, Zach Posner, the Director of Architecture in the University Architect's Office, and Padma Kudidapudi. I would also like to thank the American Institute of Architects Silicon Valley chapter for their help in advertising this series and registering our program for continuing professional education. At the end of the lecture, your attendance will be automatically noted and submitted to the AIA. Our next lecture is in 2 weeks, and we are pleased to have John Patkow from Patkow Architects. It will be held virtually via Zoom webinar just like today. Here's the protocol for today's webinar. We have allocated 10 to 15 minutes at the back end of the lecture for Q&A. Please use the Q&A section to post any questions you may have during the lecture. I will group similar questions together and will present them to the speaker as time permits. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Casper Mork-Ulnes. Norwegian-born, Casper was raised in Italy, Scotland, and the United States, which has brought a broad perspective to his eponymous firm's work. With over 25 years of design experience, Casper has worked on projects for Google, Airbnb, BMW, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as various universities, property developers, and private residential clients. In 2020, Casper was awarded the Architectural League of New York's Emerging Voices Award. He was named one of California's finest emerging talents by the AIA California Council in 2015. And in the same year, he also received Architectural Records International Design Vanguard Award. Other awards include being selected as one of the most noteworthy young architects in Norway in Under 40 Young Norwegian Architecture 2013, as well as being twice nominated for the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture, the Mies van der Rohe Award in 2019 and 2021. A recipient of over 10 awards from the American Institute of Architects, the firm has also been widely featured in international publications such as Detail, the New York Times, Wallpaper, Architectural Record, Domus, Architizer, Design, Arbitrary, and Architectural Review. He's been invited to speak at the WORM about the firm's work internationally, including at the Architecture Foundation in Florence, the California College of the Arts, and the American Institute of Architecture. Casper holds a Master of Science degree in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University, where he received the Lucille Smyser Lowenfish Memorial Prize and graduated with distinction with a Bachelor of Architecture from the California College of Arts. Now please give a warm Stanford welcome to Casper Mork-Ulnes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen here. Can you see this, John? I can't hear you, but I'm assuming everything.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the generous introduction. Obviously, thank you to Stanford University for inviting me to lecture and everybody else that John just mentioned. It's a terrific opportunity for us, and obviously very honored to be able to give a lecture today. I also wanted to thank our team at Mork-Ulnes Architects. Our work is very much a team effort, and we're really a collective of collaborators working across the two offices that we have. I'm going to start the first part of the lecture today to describe the circumstances and our approach to architecture. As you see on the map here, and as John mentioned, we have offices in Oslo and San Francisco, and Norway and California are very far apart, with on the western coast of both countries, and California really being on the brink of the Pacific Ocean, as you know, and Norway on the edge of the Atlantic and the Barents Sea. So the offices are separated by more than 5,000 miles and a nine-hour time difference. And we often jokingly tell our clients that allows us to work 24 hours a day on their projects, although that's not always true, of course. But we've been working this way for a little over a decade. And our San Francisco office was started in 2005, and then we opened the Oslo office in 2011. And Oslo's really almost on the same latitude as southern or the middle of Alaska, just south of Fairbanks, Alaska. And San Francisco is on the threshold of Southern Europe and North Africa. So it's not really just a long distance between the offices in general, but also with regards to the environment, climate, and light, etc. And these differences really create many contrasts, obviously, between the two locations, and we're always negotiating between these two contexts and enthusiastically also looking for a relationship between them. Obviously, it's a question of difference in light. There's an abundance of sunlight in Norway during the summer months, and Norwegians really worship these months of sunlight, with the sun here depicted as an energy-driving or energy-giving force in Edvard Munch's painting, The Sun. And in contrast, in Norway, we have very little light in the wintertime, as illustrated in this painting depicting a winter night in the mountains by Harald Solberg. And this, obviously, John and I were talking about this a little bit before the lecture, and this obviously affects how we go about our daily routines, our moods, and so forth. It has a great impact on us, the variety of light through the year. And when I first arrived in California as an impressionable teenager after a childhood spent growing up in Europe, I was really met with another type of light and environment altogether. And it was a stark contrast, really, from moving from the light that I described in the two earlier slides. This is a painting that my mother did of San Francisco just after we moved here, which I think illustrates the brightness and the lightness we all felt coming to Northern California. And I was personally taken by the consistent light, the blue sky, the landscape, as I'm sitting here in my office also enjoying, but also the very vastness that was quite different from what I had grown up with. And of course, there's the difference in the climatic environment as well, and also culturally. In the Nordic context, buildings often exist in resistance to the harsh environment that we have in Northern Europe, particularly this close to the Arctic. These are storehouses used to store food from my cousin's farm. And the oldest one was built in 1715. And they're, in my mind, an example of cultural knowledge built up over thousands of years. And in this case, the family who depended on this storehouse would have starved during the winter if the building didn't perform through the winter, with really moisture and rodents being the biggest enemies. The buildings are raised on stilts to prevent the rodents from coming in, and the steps are also, stairways are pulled off of the building as well. And then the roof configuration is very simple, mitigating the sliding snow and ice by shedding to the side of the entry. And the buildings are also clad in pine tar, which I'll go into a little bit later on in the lecture, to seal and protect the wood envelope, which is what we've been doing with our stave churches, which are still standing almost 1,000 years after they're being erected. So the way we sort of think about this is that superfluous architectural elements might present a liability in this setting, and these simple timber structures really endure because they're pared down to their most essential architectural elements, other than the spire on the building to the left, which was added in the 30s, probably to convey more prosperity on the farm, but also for the practical purpose to call people from the fields. But there's really an economy of means to these structures, with the main effort being spent on function, which I'll get to later as well. And that's not to say we're not also inspired and learning from the California vernacular, here referencing a barn that's hugging the landscape in deference to the windswept climate along the Northern California coast. And equally important are these aspects of California culture and the climate here that also shapes our work. Regarding culture, I would say I was taken by this since I first moved here, was really this spirit of optimism and resourcefulness and comfort with experimentation. What's often called, I guess, also the can-do spirit, that anything is possible, and that's something I've always appreciated. And this spirit, I think, is pervasive through Northern California and its history, from the gold speculators of the mid-1800s to the hippie culture of the 60s and the 70s, and to startups and the tech culture that now exists since the founding of Silicon Valley. And then regarding climate, which this slide also alludes to, California obviously is quite distinct and very different from the Norwegian climate. And a typical Norwegian building is really trying to protect from the environment, whereas a characteristically Californian building is often more open and more extending outwards. And this, in particular, this California modernist tradition of indoor-outdoor relationship as a way of being has also really become a definite driver behind our work, and manifests itself differently depending really on the context of the projects. And this is exemplified in Pierre Koenig's case study house from the 1950s, mid-50s, I believe. And then regarding the relationship of landscape to our buildings, our projects really often explore the balance between being the object in the landscape and to that being part of the landscape. And the first building at Sea Ranch is the illustration at the bottom. And the illustration at the top is the traditional Norwegian farm. And the drawing of the Norwegian farm shows the stepping buildings that are organized as a series of volumes clustered together, creating a sort of a collective form, growing over time and conforming to the landscape. And it's a very typical typology that you see all through Norway. And similarly, the building here at Sea Ranch integrates architecture and form to really work with the landscape and nature, performatively responding to the strong prevailing winds that are coming up the coast, and also learning from some of the agrarian structures of the early settlers on the California coast, like the image I just showed, hugging the ground and following nature and the landscape. So in both cases, I think it's an intelligence that's been passed maybe through generations, and a heritage, I think, that's shared through architecture. lastly, the difference between the two sort of cultures with regards to our clients. Obviously, there are briefs and personalities and economic situation, etc. But in Norway, clients tend to be maybe more practical and functionally driven, wanting low maintenance and really wanting things to be simple. And this might be ingrained really in the culture after living in such a harsh environment for thousands of years. And also, I think, because prior to the oil, Norway is obviously an oil economy in many ways. It was a relatively poor country as well. And our California clients, we find often to be more open to playfulness, and this might follow the more open cultural lineage, and obviously also the gentler climate that might allow for this. So there's obviously contrasting directions from our clients and the people we work with in each location that affects the projects. And also importantly, now our project locations are starting to expand beyond California and Norway. So we're being introduced to new contexts and other influences as well, which is very exciting. So we're getting to study new regional and cultural contexts, and we're always enthusiastically looking for new responses to our clients' briefs based on these. And we have a couple of projects as far west as Hawaii, which this is one of those projects, and as far north in North America as Toronto, and then in more far-flung parts of Europe, again, where we're getting to explore these different geographic, cultural, and environmental contexts to drive our work forward. This is the first group of projects that I'm going to show, and the theme for the first three projects are centered around buildings that reach out into the landscape, often to crop a particular view. And they also, this first group has a similarity and a common theme in also the spatial qualities with the floor plan in particular. This first project is just outside of Oslo. It's a modest cabin of about 850 square feet with a small annex containing a sauna and some storage areas. This is a traditional Norwegian cabin, the drawing from the 1850s. It's very pared back and simple, and as you can see in the plan in the section on the bottom, there's a central fireplace hearth that forms the heart of the building and creates the different spatial zones within the cabin, areas for sleeping and areas for living. And it's this sort of fluid spatial concept, with the hearth being the solid element in the center that really organizes the space. And this is a model of this project, where the building is placed on the flattest part of the site to minimize the disturbance. And as a site strategy, we also need to consider the views from the site as well as the program, and then obviously the climatic setting as well. While it's in central Norway, the weather is still quite contrasting between the seasons, and particularly rough in the winter. So the concept here was to have these shifted wings that produce a pinwheel configuration that concentrates the snow sliding in two directions, which allows for two outdoor terraces and entryways that are free of falling snow and ice, and on the orientation of the building as well. Therefore creates two sheltered outdoor spaces, one for the morning sun and one to enjoy the evening sun. So basically on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the building. And this is really to make use of the limited solar exposure in this climate. Additionally, there's views in different directions towards a lake and a forest and a hillside. So as a strategy, we also designed with the views in mind, with each one of the wings of the building pointing towards a view. And here you see the sheltered outdoor space for morning gatherings in the spring and summertime, shown here in early winter, before a lot of snow had arrived. And on the other side, this is the afternoon gathering area, which is particularly used in early spring, Easter, and through the summertime. And you can see in this slide how the roof is split and shifted in order to shed the snow away from the entry and the two outdoor terraces. And the wings branch out to nestle into the landscape, and equally important also to give privacy to the different program housed within each wing, or the arm, as we call it, given the sort of size of each of the wing. Each wing basically contains a room. And you see here in the floor plan, it's organized with these functional cores referring back to the cabin from the 1850s that allows the functions to be very compactly concentrated into different zones, which subsequently allows space to flow freely around them, but also above them. So they become spatial organizers and organize the experience of the cabin. And that really also helps with the economy of the space, making it feel, it sleeps 12 people, and it feels a lot bigger than it actually is. So the spatial arrangement, this slide gives you an idea of the ability to allow expansive openness even on a small footprint, allowing the wings and the zones to flow freely around the cabin and to the exterior. And the center of the pinwheel plan becomes the hub of family life. This slide also shows the sort of economy of materials as well, where we're using humble materials like plywood and concrete, but still creating intimate spaces, even though there's a inherent openness in the plan. And the cabin becomes part of the landscape in which it resides, and nature flows in and around the cabin, connecting to the character of the place. And the functional roof profile combined with the pinwheel configuration produces a prismatic geometry that really doesn't have a singular presence on the site, so you never perceive the building really in its totality, and it seems to change in size as you're moving around the building, and it kind of has a diminishing, an effect of diminishing scale of the house, and therefore softens the impact on the site as well. Here with the final slide, with the cows grazing in the late summer, early autumn. And again, this project shares some of the themes we explored in the previous project, but this is in California. This is also a cabin. It's about 1,100 square feet, so just slightly larger, and it's on a remote site in the hills of Mendocino County. And the site offers a unique overlook onto 3 locally celebrated landmarks, and there's also beautiful heritage oak trees throughout the site, and working around the trees and the views were really the drivers of the design in many ways. So the challenge was to provide those 3 views that the clients wished for while saving the trees. So the solution was to have this more of a, instead of a pinwheel plan, more of a branching plan that extends in each of the directions of the view, and framing the landscapes beyond. And the first thing we did was meeting with an arborist who told us we couldn't use conventional concrete foundations since that would sever the oak roots. So instead, we came up with a solution with the engineer to use slender piers and steel columns to avoid the roots. And we navigated the volumes around the trees, basically capturing the views and getting quite close to the trees as well with the thin steel posts. And here on the one side, the building really hovers over the landscape, and the only part of the building that touches down is really the entry that you see on the right. And from the other side, it's barely lifted off the ground, maybe 6 inches or so at the lowest. Excuse me. And the project had a very tight budget, which means also that we had to keep the building compact. And we used the same sort of strategy to the previous project achieved by really placing the essential functional elements into utility cores that became anchors in which the rooms are more loosely defined, allowing for an open plan and continuity across all the rooms at once, with the doors being open as shown in this slide. And here is the convergence, sort of the middle of the plan, where you can see that it's an open and flexible center that has a vantage point out onto all three framed views beyond. It's not, we didn't use large expensive glass due in part to economy, but there was also the desire to really frame the particular view at the end of each space so that it appears open, but it's really succinctly calibrated to the views that the client wanted to capture. And similarly to the last project, there's an economy of materials with a directive from the clients to cut costs and minimize waste. The building was really designed on a 4x8, 4x10 sheet, standard size, off-the-shelf sheet module. And in both of these slides, you see the end of each tube with the carefully framed view, extending the house in a sense and making a different type of interior, exterior, indoor-outdoor relationship, perhaps, but still, we think, rooted in the California way of living. And the last project in this group, which is a bit of a larger project, we just completed it recently, and it's maybe a progression of the themes that I outlined so far, but expands a little bit on the theme with the use of courtyards. This project's in Oregon and Bend. You're probably familiar with the area where you have dry, hot summers and colder winters with some snow as well. The site is very flat, but it has magnificent views of Mount Bachelor, as well as Three Sisters and some other mountains in the area. And the site was actually formerly completely forested, but there was a fire in 2003 that burned almost 100,000 acres of trees, forest land. This is a slide with the project under construction. For this project, the reason why I mentioned the fires in part was that materials were a driver from the onset, from the client's perspective. They, as a nod to the history of the site and the fire, the cladding is shoshugiban, which is a charred, burned wood siding. And also the client was very interested in cross-laminated timber. And on the top of the slide, you see the cross-laminated timber panels being staged, ready for installation. And here's a slide of showing the CLT, as they're called, panels being installed. I believe these were some of the first CLT panels produced in the US, and it was from a plant in Montana. And the shell really emerged very quickly as the panels were delivered and installed on site. And here is what it looks like today. And regarding the plan configuration in this project, in this case, courtyards that are both open and closed were used as a way to organize the space and shield from the hot summer sun as well as the winter winds. And the wings really reach out into the landscape with the courtyard in the center really becoming the hub of the home, creating more private spaces around it. And the roof form has some similarities with the first project that I showed, but it's multiplied over a woven plan rather than the pinwheel cruciform plan. So the building has a very different presence again on all sides, pursuing a sort of play with perception, evading this sort of singular reading as you're moving around the house on the exterior. And the dramatic slope of the roof is obviously, it helps with shedding the snow, but it also has the benefit of introducing general ceiling heights into each room. And because the plan is the depths of all the spaces vary, but each room is the same height, the varying footprint gives you really a range of spatial qualities throughout the house. And the cross-laminated timber was left raw, and there was a lot of attention put into hiding the plumbing and the electrical to allow this completely wooden interior. And here you can see some of the formal similarities to the two previous projects, but given more that it's a woven courtyard sort of mat typology. And it also has greater indoor-outdoor connection due to the larger windows than at least the Müller cabin, and direct physical access and closed courtyards, as well as to the landscape beyond. But like the two other projects, the plan is really arranged to flow around the different zones of the house. So it's a house almost without corridors, and it has a porosity too, with views through the building and the courtyards out beyond to the landscape. And there's this motif of square punched openings that happens throughout. And you get a sense of the porosity of the building form here, standing in the courtyard, seeing through the living room onto the landscape, and views through the different rooms and to the exterior as well. And here's a sequence showing the youngest inhabitant of the house walking inside the house and around the courtyard. You also get an idea of the texture of the charred wood siding in a little more detail, and the porosity of being able to here see through onto the landscape, and also the varying light conditions through the house from room to room. And ending here with the house receding into the high desert landscape during sunset. The next group of projects are two Alpine projects at much higher altitudes than the previous projects. This first house is located in Sugar Bowl at elevation of 6,800 feet above sea level, and as most of you are aware, there's extreme snowfall at the summit in this area. This is the Soda Springs General Store, and it's often that we get between 400 and 800 inches per year. And the Soda Springs store is right up the street from Sugar Bowl for you that are familiar with the area. So that all said, it's essential to really take snow into consideration when designing. So the concept here was based on the Alpine Chalet building, where the house is lifted onto a plinth, in this case concrete, to protect it from the large amount of snow that comes in the wintertime. And here in the section, you can also get a sense of the programmatic stacking, with the mudroom ski area being on the ground level, and then the bedrooms on the second level, and the public rooms, public areas on the top floor, which are also punctuated with two skylights to define the public spaces, and also one of the skylights brings light all the way down into the ground level room. And this is the traditional Norwegian solution to deal with high snow, where the part of the building necessitating light and air is lifted off the ground, and also a protected stairway mitigates the impact of the snow in winter. And this is our elevations of the south and the west facade, showing the stairway and the concrete plinth. And this is the north elevation, where all the bathrooms and kitchen and the private program is stacked on this side to allow for minimal window openings to minimize thermal loss on the north facade. And this is the same view, but with the lower level buried with snow. And in the last few years, we often see the snow all the way up to the windows here on the second level. And a view of the concrete plinth, which needs to be robust so it can sit exposed to the snow for extended periods of time. And then there's deep overhangs on the west and south facing facades to protect the large glazed openings and balconies from the snow. And the pine tar I referred to earlier with the cousin storehouses, this is a stave church, which is very close to the farm and also quite close to the next project I'm going to show. Both the stave church and this project in Tahoe is coated with pine tar, and pine tar is a sticky material produced at high temperature carbonization of pine wood, and it's really a key element in preserving Norwegian wooden structures, including this stave church, which was built around 1220, and of which there's, I think, almost 30 still remaining in Norway. Buildings that are almost 1,000 years old, with the wood really almost going all the way down to the grade level, except for sitting on a concrete plinth. And you can see on the right here the texture that's developed over the years. And here's the pine tar on the building, which will patina over the years as the pine tar is added about every 10 years or so. And also the protected stairway and the concrete plinth designed to deal with the abundance of snow in the winter, a move that's functional, formal, and also a nod to this maybe historic technique. And this lifted building also allows you to feel like you're sitting among the treetops, like a tree house. And while it relies on Norwegian tradition in many ways, we think that it also incorporates this California indoor-outdoor way of living, allowing the interior really to connect to the exterior, with the south and west facing walls fully glazed, connecting to the treetop and the deck. And then there's the large roof windows that I referred to earlier that really punctuate the gathering area and provides natural light from above, both in winter and in summer, and also all the way through the building down the stair to the lower level. This project's also located in a ski resort, not as high elevation since it's in Norway, but the site overlooks surrounding alpine setting, and it's in the ski resort that hosted the 1994 Lillehammer Olympic downhill skiing. And in the summertime, the land has historically been used for grazing for particularly sheep and cows. And in the wintertime, now it's mostly a leisure, used for winter leisure activities. And the cabin is built right at the top of the tree line before the harsh mountain terrain takes over. So you can see the treeless mountains in the background. And it was important for us to save the existing topography and some of the old animal paths that went through the site, and also to deal with, obviously, the snow issue. So the building is also lifted like the previous project, similar to common Norwegian historical approach to elevating buildings to straddle the topography, not just for snow. And plus buildings that also have a traditional sod or grass roof as well. And the building is supported by 45 columns, so the cabin hovers between a foot to almost 5-6 feet above the ground, depending on the terrain below. And it touches the ground very lightly, with the cross-laminated timber columns sitting on very slender steel feet that were drilled into the rock surface below, or they were sitting on tiny concrete piers where we couldn't reach the rock surface. This diagram illustrates the assembly of the cabin, with the top part of the slide showing the roof being overgrown with the same native grasses found on the ground plane below, and also in centuries-old Norwegian buildings. A very simple technique, and not comparable to the technique of doing green roofs here. And then below that, you see what we call 4 frustum-shaped ceilings with roof windows that punctuate and really divide the cabin into 4 spaces with the intention to make it feel like 4 small cabins in a row instead of one really larger space. And then we have opposing windows that allow you to see through the cabin and onto the adjacent landscape. So every room has a view, and then the columns, and then the last layer is the wood skin that really sleeves over the columns. It's really there to just protect the waterproofing membrane. This shows the existing animal path from the parking area leading to the entry. And the entry is a large punch out in the building, which creates the entry sequence and also hints at the visual permeability that runs through the entire house. And the plan in some ways follows this another local historical precedent, which is a very simple plant typology with a long and narrow house with a central circulation and opposing windows to the exterior on opposite sides. And this is a very traditional typology on farms, where typically as the generations could afford to, as economy allowed or the family needs allowed, they would add another carcass, I guess, of to expand the overall size of the house. And here you see our plan with the rooms flanked on either side of the elongated house, and the intention being that you can see through the house at all times, connecting to the nature from every room as you're walking up and down the building. You see that in this slide with the circulation path opening up onto this open, lofty feeling space, yet intimate because it's also relatively modest in plan. This project's about 150 square meters, about 1,500 square feet. This is the view the other way down to the main bedroom, always giving a view to the landscape. And you also get a sense of the cross section of the ceiling, which is punctuated with a roof window, which is another historic reference my father always referred to when visiting the cabin. This old painting by Adolf Tiedemann, which shows a light from above, which is how old Norwegian houses used to be before we had windows, horizontal windows. There's always a opening in the middle of the room to let the smoke out, but also to let light in, that was covered with cow stomach skin as a way to keep the rain out. And here, shown in the cabin, the roof window. This is a winter shot, so it's covered in snow, and it gives this more diffuse Nordic light versus in the summer, where it's obviously more intense. And then the clear panoramic crop to the views of every room towards the trees in the summertime and the marsh, and then the other direction down the valley in the wintertime. And from the main bedroom with the mountains in the far background. And you also see the rugged cladding protruding that also creates a shadow play and diffuses the crop view a little bit. And at the same time, creating more intimate moments in combination with the smaller window openings and the Nordic light moving across the room at all times of the day, whether it's the shorter winter days or the longer summer days. And there's a desire to keep things simple. As I mentioned earlier, this sort of economy of materials. So in this case, we used a single material through the entire cabin. Even the bathroom is constructed in the same wood that we used elsewhere. And we really strive for precise detailing and the use of local craft skills to craft the cabin. This is a photo from the neighboring summer pasture, and the exterior cladding was borrowed from this local animal fencing which is very common in the area, that keeps the animals contained at the summer pasture at the higher altitudes. And these fences are typically made of quarter timbers of the ends of the trees, the thin pieces that really can't be used for building materials. And it's called she-guard, hence the name of the cabin. And the cladding resulted in this diagonal transparent skin over the columns, where you get a subtle expression of the wood structure also behind the cladding, and here receding amongst the birch trees in the summertime. And the raised volume also allows the horizon and terrain to flow under the building, and for the sheep and other animals to continue using the site for grazing during the summer months, and also as a refuge from inclement weather. And the evening photo with the late summer sun coming across the cladding, and a detail of the log skin, which was built by the same craftspeople who did the interiors, but they used a chainsaw to assemble and prepare this materials versus a chisel on the interior. And then the winter really becomes alive with snow and ice. And here in the early winter afternoon, with the Nordic light gently illuminating the building. And again in winter, when it really blends with the snow coming down from above. And in the summer, here you see the roof, which is planted with the local seeds, and it's very beautiful when the wind moves the grass. And it stands in contrast really to the otherwise really linear wooden volume below. And this is some footage in the December light, showing it receding into the snow. And also footage of the interior, with the December light really having an entirely different effect on the space than some of the slides I showed you earlier with from the summer and springtime. And lastly, the last group of projects is all from Sonoma. They're located in rural areas and share material similarities, and I think could be also said to be, in one sense, a progression of each other, while at the same time they're quite different. The first project here on this slide is for a Norwegian couple transplanted to Sonoma County, and their brief required large flexible spaces that could house a workshop, storage areas, and mainly an art studio for someone who's a painter. And here we explored the barn typology. The client wanted a simple barn to replace an existing barn that was falling apart and not salvageable on the property. So this brought this, historically relevant context to the fore, and created a dialogue with the nearby barn structures. And the main question was really how to create an art studio for the painter within the barn vernacular. And that became the first challenge. And this was solved really by, instead of having a traditional barn gable, we inverted it so that you created two more functional high points within the barn. And on the top right hand side of the slide, you see the result, which is the art studio with north facing light, and therefore becoming the ideal work environment for the artist. About a year after we completed the main barn, our client asked us to design an extension to house an outdoor-indoor dining pavilion, and that's the result you can see on the top left-hand side of the slide. Was this sort of more amoeba-esque form that became an extension to the barn to host an indoor-outdoor kitchen, dining area, and a garden. And you see the amoeba-like form emerging out of the existing barn structure, and with curving concrete walls standing in contrast to the rectilinear barn, yet tying the two together with the formwork, the concrete, the texture on the amoeba was created by using recycled wood siding, the same dimension and pattern as was used on the existing barn. So both of these outward reaching forms are also extending upward, directing the inhabitants back to the landscape. And the landscape also reaches into the dining room through these organic planters that push into the interior space. And the curving walls were built out of gunite, which is basically spraying concrete up against the formwork, which means that the interior was hand troweled and smooth, and the exterior has the wood siding texture. And here seen with plants starting to mature more on the inside. And finally, here is today's situation. The client really wanted to feel like he was sitting amongst the plants, and now the plants have taken fully charge of the space and fulfilling his vision of the space. This last project, which is 2 parts of the project, has been 7 years in the making for the office, and we just completed the main house. The site is in a wildfire-prone setting, and there's a big fire that you probably all have heard of in 2017, I think it was, which raged through the site, and just as the guest houses were being completed. Thankfully they survived, and there was no damage to the structures whatsoever. So the program for this initial scope is the 3 guest houses that are shown on the top left here of the slide, which is they're sited adjacent to a pool as well as the main residence. And the topography on the whole site is quite steep, except for at the top of the ridge. So early on, we decided to keep that the guest houses needed to have a very deliberate approach to the hillside and be placed more along the ridge line, which allowed us to save some of the flat areas for outdoor use and created quite a dramatic interior experience for the guest houses. And this is a simple plan, a straightforward plan showing the 3 volumes that each have a bedroom and the bathroom. And the bathrooms are stacked towards the pool and the garden, which are I guess the public areas, more public areas of the property, so that there could be privacy between the exterior and the more private interiors, leaving the bedrooms to be more open to nature. And the whole structure is really all concrete, both inside and out. So it's a very monolithic structure. And the volumes nest into the site's contours, stepping down with the slope while opening up from within. Here you see the contrast of open and solid monolithic corners of the building, opening up to the view down to the canyon, while being more opaque towards the pool and the garden, and the roof staggered and stepping down a foot each down the slope. And there's deep punched hallways that connect private decks with the social side of the building, so you can get a glimpse of the view beyond as you're walking past the building. And here getting a glimpse into the bedrooms, and also the simple small windows on this side, which were detailed in such a way to illuminate the bathroom ceiling and walls. And we went to great lengths also to develop the formwork, the way it's expressed both inside and out, in reference to the wooden barns in the area. And being in the bedrooms really feels like a secluded world apart from the rest of the property, with this indoor-outdoor interplay, particularly with this operable glass wall towards the deck. And again, a desire to keep things simple and use a single material throughout. The only non-concrete material really was the wood doors to warm up the interiors and add one point of contrast, which is the part of the building that you touch when you're moving into and between the rooms. And while there perhaps isn't the economy in the monetary sense, there's still this economy in detailing and materiality. And obviously here, given that it was concrete, there was critical detailing to get it right, since you only have one chance for the one pour to make sure that everything is very well planned out. And this is the volume suspended over a slope that drops off dramatically into the canyon, and some footage of the sun striking across the surface of the building, the smooth interior, and the different textures and the different tactile qualities of the wood versus the concrete, and the afternoon light coming into the guests' rooms. And this is a final project. This the main house. You can see the guest houses to the right. The house sits approximately where the old house used to sit that was damaged during the fire. And the clients appreciated how the guest houses performed during the fire, and asked us to task us with creating a new house that had better indoor-outdoor relationship and also employed a good fire mitigation strategy. The plan is relatively pragmatic. The goal was really to frame and crop panoramic views while also creating fluid spatial sequences that really take advantage of the indoor-outdoor relationship allowed by the Sonoma climate. So the volume is quite slim in that sense, and its proportions maximize the interface between the exterior and the interior, allowing for natural light and ventilation and direct access to the outside from almost every room in the house. On the upper level, there's two flanks. There's the main bedroom suite to the left, and then the children's area to the right. And it's punctuated in the middle by a double height space that separates the two flanks. And there's a bridge that connects the two wings and allows view and connection down into the public space, as well as bringing light from the roof window down to the lower level. And this is a cross section showing the double height space and the indoor-outdoor relationship, and also the loggia on each side of the building, which is of different depths due to the varying solar condition. And the facade is really a composition of a rational grid work, which has this play of solid walls and glazed openings that are really dictated by the views and the structural framework, as well as the program on the inside. And an axonometric view illustrating this framework and construction system, which is also shown here during construction with the structural concrete and the concrete masonry unit shear walls between the concrete columns, which then get a sacrificial layer of wood siding on the exterior as part of the wildfire mitigation strategy. And once inside, you have a sense of the panoramic views that are framed by this express structural framework, and the play of solid and void, how that crops and frames the panoramas with the use of the shear walls and framework structure, providing a connections, physical and visual, to the surroundings, a sort of a positive and negative of open and closed apertures and indoor-outdoor interplay, as well as sightlines through the house as well, allowing your eye to travel to distant vantage points, and the upper level framing views to the landscape far beyond. And the double height space in the middle of the house, separating the functions from one end to the other, and most importantly, bringing the natural light into its core, into the center, and this taken on a foggy morning with a more diffuse light coming through the skylight. And again, a desire to keep the simple materials throughout, allowing the nature to be the focus. with the casework also being the same material. And again, an emphasis on craft and details, and it's the materiality. And this image illustrates how the loggia passively protects against the intensity of the summer sun and provides a robust buffer from the extended solar exposure of the summer months. And in this footage, you get a sense of the rhythm of the framework and shear walls, also on the exterior, and the deep overhangs that create the shaded zones around the perimeter of the house. And the building materials on the exterior have definitely a more organic and rustic appearance. The exterior, as I said, was clad in wood cedar, which will weather naturally in gray and recede more into the landscape, and concrete progressively over time. And here's the deep overhangs protecting the interior from the Sonoma sun, and some footage of the entry to the site, with the building placed on the flatter part of the site, but showing sort of perched on the hillside here. And the south facade shown without any windows, while the north facades offers more unprotected glazing connecting to the view into the wild and uninhabited canyon below, really perching above the canyon. And here's some footage showing the house in the California evening light, with a corner allowing your eye to travel far beyond. And as the shadows change and the material comes alive with deeper evening shadows. So for us, these projects exemplify this sort of synthesis of our California influence and the Norwegian straightforwardness and pragmatism. And I hope you've enjoyed the lecture and seeing some of these projects, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Casper. That's amazing. We have a few questions, but maybe I'll kick off the question with, you talked at length about how you respond to two different locales, Norway and Northern California, and obviously Oregon as well. How do you divide up the work between the offices? How do you use the experience of people who've lived in different locations to affect a new location? Or do you focus the staff in the San Francisco office on the San Francisco work and the Norway office on the Scandinavian work? I hope that question is clear.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think, you know, I see us as a team, the office working as a team. And so there's, you know, there's the geographic separation, but the technical aspects of the projects, they probably more so happen within each office, although there is exceptions like the Skigard cabin I showed you, that was mostly actually drawn here in the San Francisco office. But I think it's, you know, we're part of the beauty of being a small office means that everybody kind of gets to be involved in every project in some way, in some way. So I think that that's really kind of an important attribute and strength, and that we're a small international office, because then we really get to exchange our experiences and our ideas depending on you know, where we come from, what we've experienced, what we've learned from you know, building in California or building in Oregon or some of these other more far-flung places that we're working. So I do see that as a great strength, and I think that hopefully is sort of shown in our projects, in that they are all quite different in one sense, even though we're working on similar themes.
Another question before I get to the questions in the chat or in the Q&A. You have a very rigorous approach that shows up in the final form. Do you start with a diagram of form, or do you start with a diagram of concept? How do you, and I'm asking this question particularly with my students who may be watching in mind, how do you maintain the rigor that is so evident in your work?
You know, that's a very good question, and I would definitely say that we don't start with form. We always start with concept, and with many different concepts. And I think the way in which I've always thought of achieving rigor is through an iterative process of, you know, working through things, and that is just as true in concept design, I think, as it is when you're doing the construction documents, because to us, I think we all agree in the office that the details are just as important as the initial concept. So the way we really start working is, you know, we talk about with the team, you know, about the project, and we try to identify what the main issues of the brief are. You know, is it the view? Is it the, you know, some of these things I described? Is it the economy? You know, what is it? And then from there on, we develop probably too many concepts, which we work on in the office, and then we pick a few concepts that we share with our clients. But it's definitely the form. Usually, you know, it takes a long time to develop, and I would say it never really looks like, you know, at the end of schematic design, it won't look like the way it's going to look when it's developed. And that's because we always continue iterating on the design, because I always feel like it can always get better. So yeah.
We have a couple of technical questions in Q&A. How do you deal with snow in these buildings with gentle or no slopes?
You know, that's a very good question, and I don't know, some of you in the Bay Area might know of a Bay Area architect who died a handful of years ago by the name of Henrik Bull. But he was a great influence on me, because he had incredible experience working in alpine environments. He did things in, you know, South Korea, Japan, Norway, all over the Western United States, East Coast as well. His specialty was really, in his later part of his career, was alpine architecture, and he always said to me that, you know, actually having a flat roof can be the best solution in an alpine environment, because of the additional insulation that you get. And that's particularly true in the Skigard house, which also has a sod roof, because that holds the snow well. But basically what happens is that the prevailing winds will control the amount of snow that's on the roof. So if you look at some of our neighbors at the Skigard house, you'll see one side that has a gabled roof. You'll see one side of the roofs which will be fully loaded with snow, while there'll be no snow on the other side because of the wind. So people are always going up and having to shovel the side because of the settlement where the snow is settling. So I think I'm a proponent of it. I'm not saying you should always do it, because we don't always do it in alpine environments, but it's definitely, I think, as long as the waterproofing and all of those sort of things are taken care of, it's a very positive, can be a very positive attribute.
And then maybe the last question for the evening is, for the Bend, Oregon house, do you recall what species of CLT was used? I assume you're asking the species of wood.
Yeah, and I should know this on the top. I'm pretty sure it was Douglas fir, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think just visually, we always in the West, when we're doing projects here, Douglas fir is kind of often a go-to material because it is native and because of its color, especially when it's treated with lye, which is also a Norwegian traditional technique, which lightens the wood so it doesn't yellow over time. So that's my guess, but you can happy to answer that if they want to shoot me an email, and I can double check that.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inspiring talk and extraordinary view of architecture and design. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure.
Good night, all.
Good night.